Welcome to The Growth Engine, where we unpack the stories behind the most dynamic figures in financial services marketing. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Conrad Ford, Chief Product and Strategy Officer at Allica Bank. Conrad's career spans significant roles from founding and exiting a fintech company to advising and leading neobanks and now shaping strategy at the UK's fastest growing fintech firm, Allica Bank. Since joining Allica in 2020, a year after its launch, Conrad has been pivotal in steering the bank's strategic direction. Under his watch, Allica Bank was named the UK's fastest growing business of 2023 and just recently 2024 by Deloitte in its Technology Fast 50 Awards. Conrad, thank you for joining us today. To kick us off, can you maybe take us right back to the very beginning? Before I'm interested in what led you on your journey.
Yeah, so there's many people who come out of university, particularly top universities, with a really clearly defined plan of action and plan of career. I was the complete opposite. I kind of stumbled out of university without any plan at all. And actually, in retrospect, I don't regret that at all.
Can I ask what you studied at university?
I studied lots of ologies and philosophy, so
Right.
unemployable stuff basically. But so I luckily went to a university where people tend to overlook that stuff on your CV. So I went to a fairly prestigious university. So I stumbled out without any plan other than the fact I wanted to see the world. So I did a bit of temporary work. I got myself on a plane to India, and I thought, right, 6 months I'll see the world, and then I'll get started with my career. I turned out to be much slower traveller than I expected, and after 8 weeks, I was still on the same beach as when I'd landed. So I took longer. I took a number of years to see the world, basically.
Lovely.
So I'm notable actually. I didn't get my first permanent job until I was in my late 20s. I think 27. Now
Right.
that happens all the time in Germany, but generally because they'd done like 5 PhDs. For me, it was because I was traveling around the world and doing temporary jobs in between. So yeah, so around 27, I got sat down by a fierce auntie who said to me, I need to get a qualification and sort my life out. So the only way I can maintain my then standard of living was to study accountancy in an investment bank.
Right.
Investment bank, for those that don't know, it's the city, it's the Wolf of Wall Street type city, city of London. So I went into one of the big investment banks to study accountancy. Bluntly, I hated that job. I did it for like 2 or 3 years, but I got my qualification, and then I began to think that maybe I'd find strategy interesting. That sounded like an interesting part of business, so I managed to get myself a job at the same bank in strategy, and then I moved into one of the big sort of high street banks to do a strategy role. Sort of corporate strategy, which means you're kind of like, who should we buy, which countries we go into, that kind of quite exciting side of things. And I have to say, I did genuinely enjoy that and find it really interesting. So I say that's the first job I had where I kind of felt I had a career.
Yeah.
But by this point, we're like in my early 30s, right? So I'm quite rare in that respect. So I accidentally got into sort of startup lifestyle because I am a startup entrepreneur. Now, what I mean by accidentally is that I've done my sort of 3-year tour of duty in the strategy team of a big bank, and usually you don't spend your career doing that kind of role. It's a thing where you go to kind of accelerate your knowledge and your skills. And I wanted to, I found a very small division of the bank that was working on new technology services. And I thought I'll go and get myself a nice job title there, and then I'll move back into the big part of the bank and get a big job. But actually, what I discovered in this small, tiny offshoot, which was, by the way, above some crappy branch in Shoreditch, before Shoreditch was cool, actually. I discovered, we had a lot of autonomy in that division. We got to build things quickly, experiment. I actually discovered that that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to go back into large organizations. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that led me to become an entrepreneur.
Right.
So after a few years there, I founded my own business, which is a business called Funding Options. So Funding Options is Europe's leading comparison service for small business lending. So you're a small business, you can't get a loan from the big banks. Where do you go next? It's a real problem to solve. So I thought, the world's going digital. The world needs a comparison site. And actually, in my business plan, it actually said, Money Supermarket for business lending, with Money Supermarket being the dominant comparison site. So I set out to build that business. I was the sole founder, so founder and CEO. I didn't have anyone else with me. So it started with me literally in my bedroom, at the weekends, all the way to when I left the business, almost 100 people, and a fairly scaled business. So I've kind of been through that startup journey, scale up journey.
What was the time from sitting on your own in your bedroom to 100 people?
It was about 7 or 8 years. My journey at Fundy Options was 7 or 8 years, depending
Right.
on how you measure sort of day one. But yeah, I mean that's an interesting thing to talk about, because first 2 or 3 years was an absolute disaster.
Right.
So the business went round in circles for 2 or 3 years. And actually, in retrospect, the reason for that's really simple, in that my skill set and tool set have been built in big corporations. And
Yes. Yeah.
the analogy I always give to people is that what you learn in a big corporation is how to drive a super tanker. Yeah. These big corporations, they're not very maneuverable. They're very hard to stop and start, but they have enormous momentum. Yeah, and it's a skill set in its own to keep the thing going, right? But a startup is an utterly different beast.
Almost the opposite.
It
Very
is.
agile.
It is the
No
opposite.
momentum.
It's a speedboat. Exactly. It's a speedboat. And actually, this is a lecture I found myself giving a lot of my team members along the way at Allica, because they've often come from big banks.
Yeah.
And what it is basically, if you are, if they're the super tanker, and bear in mind, every startup has incumbents they're up against, and the incumbents usually are orders of magnitude bigger. And they have almost every advantage in their favor. They have brand, customers to sell to, this huge distribution, in our case, branch networks and banks. They have almost every advantage. They have corporate learnings, corporate memory, infrastructure. They have almost every advantage. But you've got speed and agility, okay? And it's super important about how you think about, firstly, how you run the business, and also your strategy. So, if you're a speedboat and they're a super tanker, what do you really want to avoid? You really want to avoid getting in front of the super tanker, don't you?
Yeah.
So you need to maneuver around, you need to start and stop quickly. And actually, you need to hug the coast sometimes. They can go out in the open ocean, but maybe you can hug the coast. So you need to find a part of the market where you can really grow and expand without being crushed. And then when you're big enough, then you go and fight them head to head. So yeah, so I'd come from large corporate, and I was fairly competent at running a super tanker, and it turned out it was the wrong skill set. And look, if I'd been a bit more humble at the time, there's many books that would have told me this was the case. There's a book called The Lean Startup that basically says,
Yeah.
stop thinking, launch, learn. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I spent too much time thinking. And actually, the reality is, I thought, well, bear in mind, this was quite some time ago. This was when Mark Zuckerberg was quite new at Facebook. And there was this kind of fashionable thing that startup founders were, 18-year-olds with hoodies. And I was like, well, I'm sure that works for them, but I've got a strategy background. I don't need to do that
Yes.
stuff.
Yeah.
So I can do some desktop research and figure it all out. Well, it turns out I was wrong. So yeah, so basically I spent 2 or 3 years going around in circles in my miniature super tanker. And then I learnt the discipline of building a motorboat, which then eventually became, let's call it a cruise liner. There you go. So that was my journey. Pretty brutal first 2 or 3 years. So to answer your question, I was running the business for 7 or 8 years. 2 or 3 of those years are fairly lost years. And then basically things took off, and we grew exponentially from there.
When you look back on that time now, is there a kind of inflection point that you recognize that something had either shifted within the business, or something had shifted in your approach to managing the business, which enabled it to what? I'm curious to know what that was.
I think it's the latter. Something had shifted in my management style, which is that, one of the things that I learned the hard way, which is just, it's such a simple and unarguable fact, but it's also, most of us do not face this fact, which is basically that the professional world you live in is awash with data points telling you that you're wrong. And most of us would rather ignore those data points and focus on the ones that, that's sort of confirmation biased. And it's when I began to kind of like face into those facts and embrace them and learn to love them. We'll talk about that later. In other words, everyone else, I did have competitors and I beat them all. And I think part of that was because I learnt to love the things that, basically the hard facts, that didn't necessarily fit my narrative. In my case, or in the case of Funding Options, the entire thesis was, let's take this entirely digital.
Right.
So there are people who help businesses to find finance. There's actually thousands of people doing that in the country, and they do it very traditionally, sometimes very inefficiently with paper and faxes. I thought digitalize everything, but it turned out the market wasn't necessarily ready for that, and the customer wasn't necessarily ready for that. And if there's one data point above all else that kind of like was the inflection point, it was understanding that when I looked at the data, the majority of the revenues we were making were from a relatively small number of our customers who had effectively a concierge service. So in other words, what is now fashionably called high tech, high touch.
Right.
The inflection point was figuring out that I was going to build a model that wasn't purely digital. it was using digital to deliver a better personal service to customers.
Right.
And
Right.
then that inflection point and learning that before everyone else was why we won, because our revenue engine started roaring before everyone else is, which then allows you to feed the acquisition engine, and then you get into the virtuous circle. And as I said, there was a golden period then where we grew. One year we grew 3 times, and then 2 times, and then 2 times again. So exponential is a misused word, but we grew exponential for a number
Yeah.
of years, which is a really exciting time. And scaling a business when it's going well is a really exciting thing to do. And I'm now happily doing that again.
Yeah. Just before we leave this part of your story, um, what made you decide to exit the business after being on such a rip-roaring ride, really? I imagine it is very, very kind of like adrenaline. I imagine it's a hard thing to stop doing.
Honestly, quite the opposite, because the reason I left was I had nothing left in the tank.
Oh,
I
really?
was done.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
It literally drained energy out of you. Yeah.
yeah, and actually, there was probably 18 months where I was going into the office, and there wasn't the fire in my belly left anymore, right?
Mm.
In other words, I knew it was time to go, but you can't just walk off the pitch, right? If you're the sole founder, it's almost like ripping the spinal cord out of a business, right?
Mm.
You've got to transition carefully. And by the way, let me be really clear, right? Investors and my directors knew that was the case, right?
Yeah.
It was probably more driven by them, but by me. But basically, 7 or 8 years being a sole founder in a startup. And here's the thing, right? There's a kind of feature, not bug, in the startup world, right? And when I say startup, I'm not talking about setting up your own little side of the desk
Yeah.
home business, selling perfume or something like that. I'm talking about trying to build a business that's going to change the world.
Yeah.
There's this kind of feature, not bug, that the only way you can do that is by basically faking it until you make it. Because if everyone thinks you're killing it and doing amazingly, then you attract capital, and then you attract the best people, and then you kind of get into this virtuous circle. The reality is, it is utterly crushingly brutal to be a startup founder.
Right.
Now, I'm sure that's not the case for some startup founders, but I guarantee you it's the case for the majority. But no one's able to talk about that. I'm lucky. I've successfully exited the business, and I've moved on and had a really good outcome for the business and stuff. It's in a really good home, so I can talk about that. But the reality is, I had nothing left, and I
Yeah.
was done. So I took a year off. So yeah, to answer your question, I was utterly relieved when I left the office.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
all I felt. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had tons of people reaching out to me. It's like, this must be really hard for you. I'm like, it's honestly, it's
This is
not.
great. I'm back off to India.
Yeah, yeah,
Getting
yeah.
on that
Well,
beach.
I wish. Yeah, yeah. Maybe one day. So yeah, I had a happy year off. I was advising other startup founders, some fairly well-known ones. Anne Bowden, a very successful founder of Starling Bank, everyone will have heard of, and a few others. So I had a happy year of dabbling, but largely speaking, just recharging my batteries. So that was the answer. I was done.
Now, obviously, we've all heard of Starling Bank. Your role in at that point was
I
what?
was just an advisor. I was
Yeah.
there for a few months just advising. So they had a particular bit of the business that they needed to sort of get up and running, and it aligned to my particular experience. So I was there as an advisor. I had a really happy few months there, but it was an advisory consultancy role. As at this point, I wasn't really up for getting stuck into anything long term. I needed some time off.
So moving into your current role, I'm just going to read out your current job title to make sure I get it right. You're now Chief Product and Strategy Officer at Allica Bank. What are your main roles, and what have you been up to since launch? I think in 2020.
For those that don't know, is a bank focused on the small business segment. We're a relatively new bank. We got a bank license something like 5 years ago. And now for the banking is a complex topic. To get a bank license takes many, many years. Why is that? Because banks are institutions, a small number of institutions that look after ordinary people's money. The bar to be a bank is extremely high, as it should be.
Yeah.
So a team had gone and got the bank license. Once they'd got the bank license, a new leadership team was coming in to build the bank. And our CEO, he had been recruited to build the bank. He was really excited about building it. He and I go back quite a long way. Back to my strategy role, actually, at one of the big banks. Yeah. So we'd known each other for about 15 years. We stayed in touch, shared lots of intellectual interests. I was looking for my next thing to get stuck into, and he's like, I'm going to build a bank. Do you want to come along? Do you want to come on the journey? I was like, yeah, I want to do that. And by the way, I'll front into the question. I get asked all the time, why didn't you start another business? I didn't want to at that time. Is the straight answer. So I didn't want to throw myself back in. In my year off, I decided I don't want to be CEO and I don't want to found a business. Now, neither of those are never decisions.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this on the way over. I suspect I may go again one more time before I'm done.
Yeah.
But at that point in time, I was like, why would I throw myself back into that? So I was really glad to be part of something a bit bigger,
Yes.
and actually for someone else to have the weight of being the CEO on their shoulders.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it was kind of the perfect thing for me. We get on well. He's someone he's amazing CEO, exceptional CEO. I knew he'd be. So yeah, it was just an exciting project to build a bank. Yeah,
It's not every day you get invited into a gig like that. So
exactly. So it was an easy decision for me. Basically, it aligned to what I decided I wanted to do.
when the conversation started, was a role, did this your CEO have a role in mind for you, or was it a role that you kind of co-designed and said, look, I'm in, but I would like to take this is the part that interests
Yeah.
me.
So basically, he was looking for someone with, I think his phrase was breadth.
Okay.
So let me just unpick that. To be able to have a new bank, you have to basically have specialists in each of the key functions. So chief financial officer of bank, unsurprisingly, is quite a heavyweight role,
Yeah.
as is chief risk officer. So you're expected to have people in these specialist roles that are deeply experienced, probably 20 or 30 years doing that one thing.
Mm.
Being a chief financial officer or a chief risk officer, whatever it may be, in a bank. So we had all of those lined up. I think our CEO was looking for someone who had breadth, and of course I'd been a CEO. So I like to joke I'm the chief AOB officer. Lots of things consolidate around me.
Right. Yeah.
So my current responsibilities are product and strategy, obviously per my title. I've got marketing, I've had from day one,
Mm.
partnerships, ESG, I've had data along the way, I've had all sorts of things basically. And I think it's that kind of breadth of someone who's a bit more of a Swiss Army knife
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, from a personal perspective, the bits around business I particularly enjoy. Strategy we talked about, I just find that interesting, and I think I'm quite good at it, by the way.
Mm.
Um, products and strategy for me are just two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And marketing, because what I like about marketing is that on the one hand it's extremely data driven, but on the other hand it's creative, and I'm quite a creative person. So yeah, to some extent my role reflects what I like doing, but I like doing stuff that I think I'm good at. So there's kind of no coincidence there.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go back then to I think you started in 2020, is that
About
correct?
then, yeah.
So where are we now? 2024. We were talking about this earlier, but let's get it locked down on camera and audio. Second year, being the fastest growing business in the UK.
So yeah, there's an annual list called the Sunday Times Fast 100, which is the fastest growing companies in the UK. So we are number one with the fastest growing company in the UK, but we only actually found this out quite recently. We're the fastest growing in the history of that list, which is almost 30 years.
It's phenomenal.
So to put it another way, we're the fastest growing company in the UK this century.
Am I right in saying that the previous company that held that prestigious title was Deliveroo?
Yeah, so there's another. I mean, frankly we're top of all of the rankings. There's another one of the fastest growing tech companies, which is run by Deloitte, a big accountancy firm. So we're only the second company in history to top it twice in a row, and the only
Phenomenal.
other companies to do that is Deliveroo.
Deliveroo.
As you
Yeah,
say.
well, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, look, I thought we would be successful, and we'll talk about why I thought that with such high conviction, because it's about strategy. But I never thought we'd be quite this successful. I think we're always a bit surprised, and to some extent, you become a bit immune to the latest accolade you get.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you told me any of these things would be true 4 years ago, I wouldn't really have believed you.
I'm interested to chart how that success has happened
Yeah.
within the context of your role, and almost giving us an overview of, okay, 2020, year one, bank's literally just got its license. Presumably, at that point, it's still relatively an idea. You've got to go and build a business. You've got to go and build a brand. You've got to build a client base. Where on earth do you start?
Fundamentally, no matter how good your execution can be, if your strategy isn't fairly solid, you're kind of dead. So let's start there, right? We are laser focused in our strategy, and our strategy has been extremely consistent through the life of Allica. So what is that strategy? Above all else, the focus is around who we exist for. Okay, so we exist for what we would internally call established SMEs, or if you're American, SMBs. Now, let me just unpick that a bit. In the UK, there's 5.5 million SMEs. Actually, 5 million of them, 90% are tiny businesses. They're a person with a van, a person with a ladder, a person with hairdressing scissors. Those are not Allica customers. We exist for 10% of SMEs, about 500,000 businesses that are quite established. They tend to have dozens of employees, for example, and millions in turnover. So we're laser focused on a segment. Fortunately for us, that segment's a third of the economy. So point number one, you can't grow a great company in a small segment. Ours is a big segment. So why did we focus in on that segment? The reason we focused in is because the incumbents, the big high street banks, the names we all know and don't necessarily love, struggle with our segment. So I talked earlier about super tankers. They're the super tankers. We chose a bit of the market where we're not going to run into the super tanker. Okay.
Was this strategy designed before the bank license was obtained?
Yeah, I mean, it refines, but after that, but yeah,
Okay.
fundamentally. And actually, I mean, I'd been on my own intellectual journey of learning the opportunity. It's one of the reasons I joined, but our CEO had been on a different intellectual journey, and we kind of made the same conclusion. In his words, it's the last great opportunity in banking.
Right.
So very focused on a segment that's 500,000 target customers, not that many, but a third of the economy, so quite a big pool. So why do the big banks struggle with that segment? Yeah, well, the big banks, in industry terms, they're called universal banks. That means they're all things to all people. They serve all the way from the poorest student to the largest corporation like Vodafone or Google. But at their core, they make most of their money from two polar opposite segments. One is consumers, people like you and me. There's tens of billions of us. We're very similar. We're very homogenous. We're very high volume. We're very simple in our financing needs, financial services needs. So consumer, mass market, high volume, low value. At the other extreme, you've got large corporates. They make a huge amount of money there as well. So the Vodafones of this world, they're the polar opposite. There's a very small number of them. They're extremely high value and they're extremely high complex to deal with. The consumers, they give a purely digital experience, and the corporates, they throw lots of high quality people in suits. They're very good at it, by the way. Now, the 5 million micro businesses, a person with a van, freelance hairdressers, they are so similar to consumers that you can stick them on the same operating model and infrastructure.
Right.
My favorite example there is, believe it or not, the most popular form of finance for a micro business is a personal credit card.
Right.
So yeah, they want to buy £5,000 of stock from a local cash and carry. Are they going to go and make a bank loan application? Are they just going to use their MBNA card? Our segment is really awkwardly stuck in the middle for the big banks because it's too low value for the Vodafone service, people in suits, but it's too complex for the consumer banking service, which is purely app-based and digital. So our segment ends up getting underserved by the banks, so they don't invest in their operating model and servicing model for it. So you've got a third of the economy that's being left behind by the incumbent banks. So that was the soft underbelly that we targeted. And by the way, I mean, this is not just true of me and the CEO, we all love the segment as well, right? These are ordinary businesses, right? And if you've built a business like we have, you have a lot of respect for these people.
Yeah.
If you want to picture an Allica customer, right? You know, when you drive to a town you've never been before and you accidentally drive into an industrial estate and you have to do a U-turn, and there's a slightly shabby factories, warehouses. These are our customers, right?
Yeah.
They're unsung and unloved. But you take them out of that town is dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
They are the core of the local economy. So those are our customers. It's kind of the soft underbelly. It's the bit the big banks struggle with, and I'm going to fight you very hard. Okay. So strategy was number one. And we've stayed laser focused. We constantly get opportunities to do other things, but we feel we're just getting started, right? Although we're quite a big business now, we've got of our target customers that would say, I bank with Allica, they're my bank. Yeah. Not maybe they've got a loan with us or a saving, but I actually bank with them. Is less than 1% market share. So we can be very big business but before we run out of growth. So number one was focus. And I say number two is disciplined execution. What I mean by disciplined execution, the trick in growing a business is not what you say you're going to do, it's what you decide not to do. Okay.
Yeah.
As a CEO, for example, there's always 10 things you have to do this quarter. If you try and do more than 3, you won't get anything done at all. So discipline. So we were very good in terms of the phasing our execution. We didn't try and build everything at once. We laid the components one by one, pretty much to a sort of predefined plan that we'd understood up front. And then culture, basically, we just have a natural culture of just getting things done. And I'd make the observation that large organizations, particularly large banks, they're just awash with people who love to talk about or write PowerPoint presentations about what should be done.
Yeah.
Only a small proportion of people actually do anything of consequence, right? Allicans, are people who have a bias towards getting stuff done.
Great.
We don't put any value on your PowerPoint slides or
Mm.
how eloquent you are in meetings. These things don't matter to us, but we don't need that.
It's doers that you're after.
But doers who do well.
Can I come back to the just the strategy piece, because it's
Yeah.
I understand the target customer that you're after, but for me there's a missing piece of the story
Yeah.
there. In You've identified who they are, but there's the service level that you want to give them, presumably, because you've looked at what the incumbents are not doing, because it's too complex between, it's not that it's that uncomfortable soft spot. What is it that you identified as, this is what this unloved segment actually need, and this is what we're going to focus on providing?
Yeah. So before I answer the question, a discussion I always have with my marketing team, who marketing is one of my responsibilities, is that one of the problems we have from a marketing perspective is that the big banks, they don't sort of put adverts on saying we hate small businesses, right?
Yeah.
They still put on these adverts, and it's mainly aimed at politicians, frankly, in the media, not at the customers themselves, where they've got, a relationship manager wearing a hard hat, shaking hands with this gritty looking business owner, right? So, what I always say to them is, if we tell people that's what we are, it's just noise, because they've seen it all before and they don't believe it's true because they've seen that's not true, right? So we have to show, not tell. Okay. So there's three reasons to bank with Allica, and each of them we have to show, not tell.
Okay.
So the first one is value. So if you're a medium-sized business in the UK with a big bank, they will charge you fees for everything. They'll charge you fees to have an account, charge you fees to make payments. By the way, these are fees you wouldn't pay as a consumer for the same things, right? They charge you fees for everything. We don't charge those fees, and actually we give value back. So we give cash back on your card spend. You're going to want to bring your bank account to me by the end of this. And also we pay interest on balances as well. So in other words, the money you've got floating around, we pay generous interest on that. So from a value perspective, we are literally poles apart. They will gouge you for lots of money. We're the other way around. We'll give you lots of money. So value is point number one. And value is easy to sell, right? It's clearly easy to sell. Point number two is a relationship. So we do have, I talked earlier about my hard learning about the concierge model, right? We unashamedly have a relationship-based bank. We don't try and do everything digitally. Every Allica customer has a relationship manager. So if something goes wrong, or they've got a key question they want to answer about their financial situation or whether to buy their premises, they can pick up the phone and speak to their relationship manager. That's what the SMEs in my segment used to have from the big banks, but it was taken away.
Yeah.
So again, show, don't tell. Now, how do we show that one? Because I told you the adverts on the big banks pretend they have that. But the way we show it is on your website. You can literally go and see the contact details of our relationship managers.
Right. Yeah.
So you try and speak to your relationship manager at some of the big banks. They'll put you through a chatbot pretending to be a person, and then a call center, another call center, another call center. You might eventually, if you complain enough, get to speak to your relationship manager. Ours are right there to speak to. So point number two is relationship. And then the third one is speed and simplicity, which is fundamentally technology. So what we're trying to build, particularly with our current account, is a current account that's the most useful for customers in our segment. So what does that mean in a practical sense? I talked about how the big banks typically try and service our customers on a consumer banking platform. What that means is a consumer banking platform is generally a single player bank account. So in other words, it's designed for one person to act on it. But if you're a mid-sized business, that doesn't work. You're going to have a credit controller's job is to chase invoices, but you don't want them to have access to the bank account or complete access because they might see everyone's salaries. You'll want a financial controller who can raise payments, but you don't want them to be able to make payments, or they make a £2 million payment to themselves and run after Mallorca. Your external accountant probably wants to read your transactions to do your accounts for you, but you don't want them making a payment. So we're trying to build a multiplayer bank account that basically works really well for the problems, the day-to-day things. That one, by the way, is a work in progress, right? We're at the start of the journey, not the end of the journey. But I'm really excited about that. And actually, one thing that really excites me is that most customers in our segment, they're big enough that they manage their finances elsewhere from their bank. It might be their accounting software, for example, or if they sell on Shopify, that's probably the center of the financial universe. Well, guess what? What about if our bank account is designed not to force you to come and do online banking? What if our bank account is designed to make it easier to work where you want to work?
Yeah.
So we're kind of beginning to sort of think about how we might really transform it. So that's the kind of third area of value, speed and simplicity. And we're kind of on a journey there, and a very exciting one.
Thank you. Thanks for giving that. That gives me a much clearer understanding of where the business
You're going to
is.
do
And
your application tomorrow.
yeah, absolutely. Charlie, who does all the finance, he's sitting in the back room. He's probably on there already, looking for a discount code, maybe. um, so let's go back to the point I was making before about the year one, year two, year three, four. Where does the different aspects? What was on your big to-do list? And if we go through those different stages.
Right. So there's actually two sides to a bank, right? So what is a bank at a very intellectual level? A bank raises money from ordinary people and small businesses. In other words, a bank is where you put your savings. So that's one side of the bank. And the other side of the bank lends, and it's largely speaking lending out that money.
Okay.
The reason that banks are so heavily regulated is because they're lending out ordinary people's money. Now, there's infinite levels of complexity why what I just said isn't quite true. We have to hold huge amounts of capital as a sort of cushion, but fundamentally, that's what a bank does.
Okay.
What that basically means is to build an amazing bank, you need to have two equally weighted muscles, your savings and your lending. Well, the one that we had to activate and be the best in the world at very early was the lending one, because that's how banks make money. So in our early days, we focus on activating the best lending division in the market in our very specialist area. Specifically, by the way, this was lending against business property, so lending against a factory or warehouse. So just as homes have mortgages, so do factories and warehouses and hotels and shops. So becoming the best in the country, and hopefully at one point the best in the world at that, was priority number one. We were lucky in that there's a easy to activate channel into that segment, which is professional brokers whose day job is to help businesses find that. So on day one, we had one product. We're obviously building lots of other stuff, but in terms of what really mattered, one product, one channel. And then slowly but surely, pretty much every 3 to 6 months, we launched the next component, another lending product, another channel. So by 2 years in, we had a direct franchise. We had our relationship managers around the country, and I'd built up a marketing capability and a fairly strong marketing capability to sort of get in front of our target customers. Most recently, for example, I've begun to push into accountants as a channel. So the most important, well, statistically, the most valued advisors to our segment is the professional accountants who support them with their books. And so we've actually very excitingly, very successfully begun to push into that as a channel. So basically, in a very disciplined way, deploy, get it to a certain scale, hand over to management, and move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And actually, one of my roles has been I tend to be, not always, but quite often, I'm the one doing the land and expand of a new channel or a new product, because my startup background sort of makes me naturally suited to that.
Yep. So the current area that you're going for or breaking into is accountants.
Yeah, I mean that's that for me personally, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, the core of the bank remains focused on much bigger and more established channels that we have out there. But yeah, our accountancy channel, it's I've had a full team in place since early summer, but we've already just made a decision to double that team because it's going well. So it is about basically. I mean, I talked about my failure as a startup founder. Luckily, I learned from that, right? Which I've become quite good at, kind of, you know, launch quickly, learn.
Yeah.
Now, to give one example of that, when I decided to enter the accountancy channel, the decision was made actually now 18 months ago. It's just I didn't have a team in place until maybe 9 months ago. But there was the biggest accountancy conference was coming up a month after I decided to launch the channel.
Right.
Now, old Conrad would have been like, well, we're not ready for this. Yeah. New Conrad said, you know what, we're going to build a stand. We're going to go to the conference because we're going to learn a lot at the conference.
Yeah, right.
I just dragged along some people. I gave them one-on-one on the accountancy channel, and we learned so much, right? I mean, it actually fundamentally changed my and actually got me excited about the channel as well.
Yes.
But the point is basically, you know, what's the worst that can happen if you turn up at a conference with a stand, right? You know, so that
you're going to have a lot of conversations regardless, aren't you?
You're going to learn a lot. And actually, you know, a lot of the assumptions I'd had about what was important to accountants at that point in time was wrong. Yeah. And that's a very, you know, spending 15 grand on a stand or whatever it was is a very cheap way of finding out that you've got something fundamentally wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great insight, just that piece on its own. So I was going to ask you about approach to research of learning about your customers right when you were talking about the launch phase. But that's one way that you're learning about how to
Yeah,
break into
and I
new
may
areas.
understand, by the way, right? I mean, you wouldn't expect someone at my level to be made, but I wanted to go and meet lots of accountants and talk to them, right?
Yeah.
Or better way, right? And actually, you also find what they're not interested in, right? I remember boring the crap out of some accountants about stuff that now is not central to our proposition, but I thought was going to be really
Yeah.
important. So there you are.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things we were discussing before we actually started recording, which I want to go back to, is the power of a brand. We talked about an agency that you work with that helped you build out the brand. I wonder if we can just cover off that story again, perhaps give me a little bit of an overview again of how you came across this
Yeah.
particular agency.
So yeah, we're going to have to start by going right back to the relatively early days of my startup. So my startup, which is now, we're now talking about 10 years ago, I think, roughly. So at this point in time, my startup was beginning to really activate. We were activating some channels, and these are fairly Route 1 channels, paid search, etc. But they were beginning to work, and we were beginning to get some real traction and product market fit. And I remember reading this article on LinkedIn by somebody, and it was talking about the theory of category creation, which is, for those that don't know, the theory is basically you need to create a category and then become the category king. And actually, there's a growing body of evidence that says the dominance of the category king is getting bigger over time. So, for example, Salesforce, which we all probably know and some love and some don't love, created the category of online CRM and they came to dominate it. Yeah. But this happens again and again and again. But they created the category. That's the point. So I was so fascinated by this. I did something I've never done in my career before or since. I actually reached out to a consultant and say, who'd written this thing and said, I'd like you to advise our business. So this guy comes in and he did a workshop with us, a few hours with us. Really interesting, got a lot out of it. And he said, right, I'll come back in a couple of weeks. He came back a couple of weeks. He said, look, Conrad, I'm doing myself out of a job here, but you don't need me.
Right.
I'm like, okay.
An honest consultant.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
He said, look, I've spoken to your management team. They've got a really clear strategy. They understand what they're doing. I don't think I'm going to add a huge amount of value. You don't need me. You need a brand consultant because you're just effing boring. Yeah. He said, I was thinking about you in the car the other day, your business in the car the other day. I think about you guys far more than I should do, given how little you pay me. And I couldn't even remember the name of your company. You need a brand consultant. You don't need me. So yeah, so that was kind of like this just someone just sort of saying right in your face, this is a problem. Yeah. And up until that point, I'd been very conservative on the issue, on around brands. The name of the business was Funding Options, and it's like does what it says on the tin. But there was one player in our category. They weren't actually a competitor, but they were in the same category of business lending that was just blowing everyone out of the water, raising tons of money. And I actually hunted down the brand agency that they'd used and reached out to the brand agency because I thought, well, that's probably the number one clue to basically who I should speak to. And they basically lectured me on how brand, even in B2B, is about personality and emotion. And actually, the founder of that agency just said to me, look, Conrad, right, there's 100 agencies in London. It's the best marketing agencies in the world in London. 100 agencies can do this, right? My experience is that whether or not this succeeds has come down to how brave you are, because we're going to push you to be brave, right? Because if you don't do something memorable, then you might as well just burn money on a bonfire.
Yeah.
And that kind of like was my mental journey of just kind of like, if you're going to bother in putting any money into brand, you've got to be distinctive and memorable, and you're going to have to take some risks. And actually, there's a huge amount of evidence, by the way, that suggests B2B businesses buy on emotion and justify on fact.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go to, I reckon, 95% of B2B websites, and they're really boring and they're talking of features and functions and using industry jargon. That is not the basis on which people are going to buy your products. They're going to buy your product because they get emotionally connected to it, because they're human beings.
I think there's been a lot of research done by LinkedIn B2B Institute on this,
Yes.
working with Les Burnett and Peter Field, that have been looked in, have got the evidence for anyone that's interested in going to find the data.
I mean, it's just quite extraordinary, despite the fact that this is empirically proven. People still write these horrible functional websites and industry jargon, right? My pet hate is the word empowered. Yeah. Never use a word on your website that you wouldn't use in the pub.
Mm.
Do you say empowered in the pub? I hope you don't. I don't. If you do, I don't want to go to the pub.
Unless that's a pint of tasty bitter, probably not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So maybe we should do that. Let's launch a bit. Empowered IPA. Okay. Yeah. So basically, that forced me out of my corporate comfort zone and realization. If I was a challenger, I either do no brand or I do it bravely and
Yeah.
take some risks. And actually, I've followed that through with Allica because our brand identity. We're really working on it at the moment, by the way. But we have our kind of brand icon is a orange bowler hat.
Mm.
Now, in Britain, a bowler hat is an iconic banker symbol, but ours is an orange bowler hat. And our tagline is how business banking used to be, just better. And actually, it's quite interesting. You can put the orange bowler hat in front of we have lots of the actual hats in front of a customer or target customer, and they'll be like, I get it, right?
Mm.
You're a fresh version of what used to be there, right? So yeah, just
Which is
literally bright.
that's a very, very powerful kind of subliminal retrieval cue or something. When you were telling the story, it made me think of my dad's business. And he used to have a bank man. My dad used to run a carpet business, and he used to have a bank manager in his town. He used to go down, have a relationship. He went on holiday with his bank manager. He ended up buying a house from his bank manager. The bank manager's now in his 90s. My dad still has a relationship now, as a mate. And that is how it used to be back in the day. So
Well, that's pillar number 2, relationship.
yeah, yeah. I really lock into what you're saying there, and I think I understand now the business banking of how it used to be. It's
Just better
just better.
because of the digital bits.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So you've gone through I'm also when your consultant said to you, I'm going to do myself out of job, you need it. What was your reaction? Did you know in your gut then that what he was speaking was truthful?
No, I mean, generally speaking, one of my things I've learned about myself is I react very badly on day one to ideas that aren't my own.
Yeah.
So, look, if one of my team comes to me, if we've been talking about something, yeah, and my team comes to me with okay, here it is, right? Generally speaking, it's almost always different to what I had in my mind.
Mhm.
I will always these days, poker face, sleep on it,
Yeah.
and often leave it a week or so, right? So, for example, we're doing a refresh on our brand identity at the moment, right? And conceptually, we'd agree what we're going to do, but rendering is different, right? But the reality is, I now realize having so when I first saw it, I did my poker face, and it wouldn't have been a poker face 10 years ago. I'm going to sleep on this one, so
Yeah.
I'll be neutral. And I now realize, having reflected on it, it's much better than my idea. So
Yeah.
so yeah, so basically, no is the straight answer.
No, no.
But I think I was mature enough to sleep on it.
Sorry, I'm going to then lead us on to another point because then we started talking about the power of a brand, a good brand that actually starts to work hard for you. And presumably you would agree that the brand has had a role to play with the extraordinary growth that the bank's now going through.
Yeah, I mean, look, brand is a relatively recent investment for Allica because, coming back to that discipline execution bit, brand is a slow burn, it's a flywheel. So one of the things I'm most proud of with marketing and how we as a marketing function, not just me, in the early days we had very little money to play with. Yeah, let's be clear about that, right? Um, and rather than do what the natural inclination was basically we'll do a bit of brand, a bit of this. We basically decided to marshal all of our limited resources and focus actually on 2 things that we thought we could win with the limited resources. One was channel branding. So I talked about brokers.
Yeah.
We thought that's a small, quite connected community. We can probably focus our resources and probably win in that one little tunnel, basically.
How did you do that?
LinkedIn turned out to be a
Yeah.
superpower there,
Yeah.
and also there's quite a lot of conferences that go on in that segment, and we always nail the conferences. I think we always have the best in show at the conferences.
Yeah.
I say we, I have nothing to do with it. It's my team, but so I always hear back from other people. You
Yeah.
guys were amazing. And then the other was employer branding. There you go. That's a strange one. So I had a marketing budget, and I decided to focus it on marketing us to potential talent. And the reason for that is because I'd learned during my time building a business that in the end, you win the talent battle.
Yeah.
You win the war.
Yeah.
Or to put it another way, if you haven't got the best talent, there's no point trying to build a great company. So I thought, how do we become an attractive place to come and work at? And back then, by the way, no one had heard of us. We were deluded about our employer brand. These days, the best people want to work at Allica because of our success, right? And actually, there's a marketing analogy here, right, which is that most companies do outbound marketing for talent. In other words, they're basically trying to find people. If you build an employer brand, it becomes inbound marketing. You're basically
Yeah.
shifting through people who want to join your company. So I decided that with our limited resources, I wouldn't spend it on customer acquisition, I'd spend it on talent acquisition. So yeah, those two battles. Brands, we only actually began to spend any money on brands just over a year ago. And that was a last minute decision, by the way. We had a bit of money to spare. Basically you're meant to take months to figure out your brand and your campaign and stuff. We did in about 4 to 6 weeks. Unfortunately, we got it right. I think as much luck as anything else. But yeah, we've only been doing brand for a year or so. But the our brand recognition, our target segment is more than doubled this year already in our latest data. But above all else, you just increasingly you see it coming through in other things. So your conversion rates increase nothing's changed except something outside of the you haven't changed the forms or the messaging you've changed nothing. So something out there is basically working on your behalf to drive people over the line, and we are beginning to see that happen.
Yeah, I would think that it would accelerate that because everything said you read the data around the brands is that you don't keep changing them once you've got it. It's this
well,
superpower.
I use the phrase flywheel, right? There's certain things in business which basically they're very hard to get started. And you give them lots of little pushes, but once they get the momentum, the momentum stays, and brand is one of them. And actually our business model is designed as a flywheel. So for those who don't know, there's an amazing book called Good to Great, which sounds like it's a horrible rah-rah American business book, but it's actually the most nerdy book in history. They literally spent like 5 years studying the underlying data of the most successful companies of the last century. And one of the things they found was this characteristic of a flywheel, which is a business model that basically lots of little pushes. Slowly but surely, the flywheel just gets faster and faster and gets more and more momentum. Amazon is the most famous flywheel of them all.
Right. Is that Jim Steinberg?
Jim Collins.
Jim Collins, right. Yeah.
But Jim Collins literally sat down with with Jeff Bezos, talked about the flywheel. And Jeff Bezos famously, over lunch with his senior executives, wrote out their flywheel on a napkin. You can actually see the napkin.
Wow.
And basically, the Amazon flywheel is the most famous flywheel in the world. The bigger they get, the harder they are to compete with, and the more customers love them. It's a powerful thing if you can get it right.
Fantastic. And is this something that you talk about with the team, the flywheel effect? Is this just your learnings that you've taken on board?
So I guess the levels of I think one of my strengths, by the way, is I'm quite good at communicating at all levels. So if I'm communicating to the boards or investors or potential investors, right, we do, we talk flywheels and all kinds of jargon. But actually, I talk in analogies when I'm talking, when I'm doing what we call an all banks, speaking to everybody, like my muscle one,
super tanker speedboat.
Exactly.
In
fact, I've got a slide with a super tanker and a speedboat on it. So I think communication is one of my better skills, and actually you have to communicate for your audience is a superpower.
What's next in line for your individual? You mentioned that you're sort of you do have job titles, but it's also AOB. It's what are the areas that are coming up on your radar for the future growth?
Well, I think that the great open question for Allica is whether we go international. And to be clear, it's an open question, right?
Yeah.
I'm not hiding some. It's something we've talked about. So I think if we go international, I clearly will have a role to play in that.
Yeah.
But that's an if. Beyond that, I mean, we're just getting started, right, in the UK. Although we're now quite a big business, as I said before, in sort of deep customer relationships, we're under 1% market share, right? And we're already quite a substantial business. So to be honest, we've got a lot of stuff to go.
Yeah, within the UK itself, it's got enough to keep you busy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I remain enthused and excited by the journey, right? I said that scaling up is a great thing to be involved in, right? And actually, this is the third time I've been involved in one of the UK's fastest growing companies. It's more by luck than anything else. I've just been on this. I've done this trajectory a number of times, and it's just super exciting, right? Because on the one hand, when you're scaling up, you don't have the perma crisis of startup land, but at the same time, you don't have the kind of staid ossification of working in a large corporate where nothing ever happens, and half the people are there to stop you doing anything because because they see risks or what you do might make them out of a job. You have neither of those things. You're kind of in a happy medium in between, and for my stage of life, it feels the right thing to be doing.
Just kind of closing thoughts. It's fascinating to hear your story, but I'm just keen to get your reflection now from being a lone founder to being part of the team. Many people, when you took that role, would have probably have thought you're going to struggle with not being the final decision maker. It doesn't sound, that sounds like something that you are actively delighted about.
Yeah, no, 100%. When I was interviewed by the board, they were clearly all already convinced that I could do the job. Almost every interview was a variant of, have you thought really hard about the fact of you're going to be your own boss anymore?
Yeah.
The reality is, right, it's the last thing they need to worry about, because I've had a whole year of doing nothing, walking the dog and thinking about that very question. So yes, I had thoughts about it a lot. This wasn't in my mind at the time. I want to be clear about this, but retrospectively, I keep coming back to this. I think it's an Irish expression. They say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And actually, I think by accident, not design, that's what's happened to me, because the business I found, I'm very proud of the business I founded. It employs almost 100 people. It's had it's found a successful home. It's funded like £1 billion to small businesses in the UK. I'm really proud of that legacy. But the reality is that was not a business. It's not a business that's going to change the world. Yeah. Whereas I think Allica we are building something really consequential here, because there is a real problem, and the businesses we support, they really do matter. As I said, you take the few dozen established SMEs out of the average town, that town is dead. Yeah. So if we really want to level up, for example, we need to fix this problem of banking for these businesses. So I think we're going to build something consequential, both in terms of our purpose and in terms of our scale as well. So I remain enthused and excited by the journey.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Conrad, so much for coming down today, chatting to us. I wish you all the success, and Allica as well. Hope you win 2026 fastest growing business as well, 2025 fastest growing business as well. Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening today to The Growth Engine. If you enjoyed this episode and like to hear more, please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from, and follow us on LinkedIn for regular updates, or on hubagency.co.uk. Thank you, and see you next time.